So I think regarding the question of whether urban, suburban, or rural areas are the most dangerous overall, two of the key metrics to look at are homicides and traffic fatalities. Now, obviously, there's other forms of premature death that could potentially vary from area to area, like, say, dying in house fires or um, wild animal attacks. Although deaths from wild animal attacks are not as common as you would think. Deaths from domestic animal attacks too might vary from region to region. Self termination, that would I gotta censor myself because of YouTube there, but yes, that is something that varies from region to region. Obesity related deaths, drug and alcohol related, and tobacco, nicotine, vaping related. But the thing is, with a lot of these things, it could be argued that these are things you do to yourself and that are choices. Like in the case of like drugs, alcohol, tobacco, self-termination, obesity, like these are all to some extent the product of your own choices. Although it could be argued that where you live will determine how much social and just general external pressure there is to do these things. But nonetheless, I will concede to the argument like it is to some extent a choice, and you can to some extent control it through self-control. Although I do maintain how much self-control you need depends a lot on where you live, because how much pressure there will be to do these things depends a lot on where you live. But I'll concede on that there is some element of choice there, whereas being killed by a vehicle or in a homicide is to some extent outside your own control. And these are also some of the things that people fear most. Now, as for other things that you don't entirely control, like house fires or wild animal attacks or natural disasters, I mean, it's harder to find statistics on that on like an urban versus suburban versus rural basis. I mean, wild animal attacks aren't actually that big a deal, as I said before, in terms of numbers killed. Natural disasters, I would guess, would be more regional than anything, as opposed to like urban versus rural. House fires, that would be an interesting one to compare, but again, I haven't found data on that on an urban versus suburban versus rural basis. So I'm going to look specifically, as I said, at homicides and traffic fatalities, because also these are two things that people often bring up in these discussions. Because people who hate cities will always say, oh, you're more likely to get murdered there. And one comeback that I often make to them, and that sometimes other people do too, is like, yes, but you're more likely to die from a car accident overall, and you're more likely to die from a car accident specifically in suburban and rural areas. So I'm going to look at the statistics, because I do have statistics on these things, and I'm going to compare them overall to see which type of region is the most dangerous overall. Now, I did say you're more likely to die from car accidents overall than homicide. That is absolutely true. And I am looking at American statistics here, by the way. Just American statistics for the purpose of this. So the overall homicide rate in the US for 2023 is 6.8 per 100,000, whereas for car accident deaths per capita, it is 12.06 per 100,000. So it's almost twice as high overall. But when looking at the more detailed statistics, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get super recent information for homicide based on region, based on type of city, because unfortunately, the FBI seemed to have only published this data up until 2019. They seem to have done away with a lot of these tables since then. I don't know why. They still have the racial data, just not in table form like they do here. And there's a lot of interesting, useful stuff here. But yeah, it's 2019 for the more detailed homicide data, and then 2024 for the most recent car accident data. And this car accident data is actually from this article based on a study. So this is not data that is simply replenished every year, but it is actually more recent in this case. So, okay, I'm going to do something dumb that I normally never do because it's easy to accidentally dox yourself this way, but I'm going to film my screen because this is the easiest way to read it. Okay, so for cities, for the homicide rate, this is from 2017. 2019. So it's different. I said 6.8 is the total homicide rate for the U.S. However, this is from 2019. So I think the overall rate was a bit lower then. So you might want to, I don't know, maybe adjust these statistics a bit upward, maybe. But yeah. So although keep in mind, 2023 was when I said like it's 6.8 overall, but it's probably a bit lower now because there was a big bump in homicides between 2020 and 2023, and I think it's starting to go down again now. So yeah, anyway, so it might be closer to what it was before. But here it says 5.0 for all agencies. I don't know if that's the overall rate for the United States, but 5.7 for all cities. Now, cities, I think by the term they're using is using the word cities in a very broad sense. So we can see group one, so cities, and this doesn't mean metropolitan area, this means city proper. 250,000 and over, the homicide rate is 9.6. And then they subdivide this further. So for 1 million and over, so that's the biggest cities. That's like New York, LA, Chicago, because this is for the city proper, not the metropolitan area. So this really is mostly the really big cities. It's 7.4. So you can see it's actually lower for the really big cities than it is for all cities 250,000 and over. So that right there refutes a lot of the arguments of people who claim the bigger the city, the worse the crime rate. That is simply not entirely true. Not in this case, at least. But otherwise, it does seem to be true, because as you get down in the list, okay, it gets lower as you get smaller with each iteration, other than the very biggest, because 500,000 to 999 is 12.5. That's the highest. Then 250,000 to 500,000 is 10.1. Then 100,000 to 250,000 is 5.9. Then 50,000 and 100,000. These aren't really cities per se anymore at this point. These are more like towns. It's like, okay, 3.8. 25,000 to 50,000, 3.3. And some of these might be suburbs also. It's very confusing how they group in suburbs. I'm going to try to explain it, but it makes no fucking sense. 10,000 to 25,000, 3.0. Under 10,000 is also 3.0. Now we see here, okay, metropolitan counties in total. So I think that means counties in metropolitan areas in total are 3.4. But they define metropolitan area very broadly here. This includes a lot of much smaller cities and what I would call towns rather than cities. Non-metropolitan counties is 3.8. I'm going to assume that kind of means rural areas. So I'm going to use that as a statistic for rural areas. But it does say includes state police agencies that report aggregately for the entire state. So this will throw off this statistic a little bit. Maybe want to round it down a little bit. But yeah, 3.8. I'll keep that in mind then. Now, suburban areas. So it does have one for suburbs in general, 3.0. So it's actually lower for suburbs than for non-metropolitan counties. However, the non-metropolitan county statistic might be thrown off a bit because in some cases they're including the statistics for entire states, which is very confusing. Now, the definition of suburban area here is extremely confusing. It says here, suburban areas include law enforcement agencies in cities with less than 50,000 inhabitants and county law enforcement agencies that are within a metropolitan statistical area. Suburban areas exclude all metropolitan agencies associated with a principal city. The agencies associated with suburban areas also appear in other groups within this table. Okay, so that means that some of these other cities are suburbs. But, okay, the definition for suburban area is very confusing. Because, okay, I get the part where it says it excludes the principal city. So principal city would mean like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, etc. Whereas it would include maybe like, I guess it might include Newark theoretically as a suburb. It would include Long Beach theoretically as a suburb, I guess. Even though those aren't true suburbs really at all. But it would include also things that most people would consider suburbs, like Mesa, Arizona, or Scottsdale, Arizona, as part of the Phoenix metropolitan area. What I don't understand when it says it includes in cities with less than 50,000. So is that including places that aren't really suburbs but have less than 50,000 people, like towns of less than 50,000 that aren't part of a bigger metropolitan area? But it says, okay, wait. Okay. Cities with less than 50,000 and county law enforcement agencies that are within a metropolitan. Okay, so it is within a metropolitan statistical area, but not the principal city. And it has to be less than 50,000. Okay, so it would not include Newark or Long Beach, but it also would not include like Mesa, Arizona, or Scottsdale probably, because those have more than 50,000 people. So right off the bat here, this is a problem because many suburbs, including places that would be suburbs by any definition, do have more than 50,000 people. So that's a problem with this definition right here. But it might actually be closer to the definition of like the really hardcore, like NIMBY type people, because those people are like the most likely to live in like these like exurbs and places like that. And a lot of those would be less than 50,000 people. So perhaps for the purposes of arguments, like this is a better definition because it excludes like a lot of the like inner ring suburbs and like more established suburbs, which are not the types of places that these hardcore NIMBY suburbanites prefer. But again, it really depends on your definition because it's like, are we trying to compare suburbs as a whole, or are we trying to compare specifically like exurbs and like extremely low density suburbs? I don't know. Regardless, this is the only definition we have, so I'm going to go with it. So for traffic accidents, it divides it into 6 groups. Major metro core with 9.9 per 100,000. Major metro suburbs, also 9.9. Medium-sized metro core, 12.1. Medium-sized metro suburbs, 15.4. Small metros, 15.7. And then non-metro rural, 21.8. So we see here it's very much the reverse of the homicide data, where the more rural it is, the smaller the city, the worse it gets. So it's very much the opposite here. And we can see that the numbers get higher here than for homicide, with the rural area being 21.8. So if we add them up and do the math, how does it work? Well, the categories here aren't entirely the same. So I might have to do a bit of guesswork here with the categories, but I'm going to try to line them up as closely as possible. So I'm going to start with the rural. With the rural, we have car accident rate of 21.8 per 100,000, and then homicide rate of 3.8. Now the 3.8 might be an upper estimate because it throws in erroneously entire states in some case. So you could round that down a little bit. I don't know. But if you add the official numbers, it's 25.6 for both combined. And again, if you want to round it down a bit, I don't know, let's say 25. So I'll put in like 25 question mark. Okay, I'm being generous, rounding it down a bit. But yeah, that would be for rural areas. Now for small metros, I'm going to use the statistic for 100,000 to 250,000. I have no idea what they mean by a small metro exactly. So I'm going to guess that's what it is. Like 100,000 to 250,000 people in the city. So and they don't differentiate between urban and suburban here. And I guess when it's a smaller metropolitan area, it doesn't matter as much. So the total of that is 5.9 homicide rate, 15.7 car accident death rate. So the total for that is 21.6. So lower than for rural areas in total. So for medium-sized metro suburbs, I'm just going to use the suburban as a whole, like the suburban as a whole, which is 3.0 for homicide. And then it's 15.4 here for car accident deaths. So that would be 18.4 for for medium-sized metro suburbs. So that would be like, I guess, like a metropolitan area of like, I don't know, like like 1 million to 2 million or 500,000 to 1 million. I don't know. It's really hard. Like I don't know the definition here, and to get the specific data for this, you have to like pay for it, and I'm not gonna do that. But someone else can if they want to. But so I'm gonna guess it's like 18.4 for medium-sized metro suburbs. Well, actually, it doesn't really matter because the suburban data is the same regardless. So I'm not really doing any guesswork here because the suburban data on the homicide rate is the same for regardless of the size of the city. So actually, this one would be more cut and dry. The one that would be more guesswork would be the small metro category because we don't know what small metro means, and that, yeah. But okay, the next one does require some guesswork because this is medium metro core. So for medium metro core, I'm assuming that it's 250,000 to 500,000 for the core city, and that's a homicide rate of 10.1. So, and then a car accident death rate of 12.1. So we have 23.2 as the total death rate. So that's actually more dangerous than for the medium-sized metro suburb or for the small metro overall, but less dangerous than for rural areas overall. Let's see here. So for major metro suburbs, it would be 12.9 overall, 9.9 plus 3. And this would make them the safest overall by far so far. Yeah. So, yeah, major metropolitan area suburbs would be the safest by far so far out of any of these. Now, major metro core, this one's going to be a bit trickier because major metro could be either 1 million and over or 500,000 to 1 million potentially. So if you use, I'm going to divide it into the two categories. So for 500,000 to 1 million, if you add it up, 12.5 for 500,000, and then you add the 9.9 for major metro core, it would be 22.4 overall for the major metro core for the 500 to 1 million in the core city. So those would be cities like, I don't know, like, I don't know, like Kansas City or like, no, I don't think St. Louis is even 500,000. It might include Detroit, maybe. Cities like that. Like I think a lot of these like middle American cities would fall into this group. So a lot of the like inner city middle America type cities, like whereas okay, like the 22.4. So that's close to medium metro core. It's higher than any of the suburbs, higher than small metro. Slightly a bit lower than medium metro core, still significantly lower than rural areas. So yeah, so far rural areas are still the most dangerous. Although I'm sure some people argue like, yeah, that statistic for rural areas is completely worthless because it includes entire states in some cases. Like, okay, well, even if you subtracted homicide entirely, rural areas would still be more dangerous than small metro areas, medium metro suburbs, and major city suburbs based on traffic accident rates alone. Even if you assume that the homicide rate was actually utterly zero in rural areas, which it's definitely not. So just keep that in mind. So for the biggest cities of all, this would include like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, etc. It'd be 7.4 for the homicide rate plus 9.9 for the major metro core. traffic accident death rate. So that's going to be 17.3 overall for the biggest cities. So that makes the biggest cities less dangerous than the medium-sized metro core or the other category in this core, which is like the 500,000 and 1 million. This would make the really big cities significantly less dangerous even than small metropolitan areas, less dangerous than medium metro suburbs, less dangerous than every other category so far, aside from major metro suburbs. So, overall, from these statistics, major metro suburbs are the safest, and the most dangerous are rural areas. But again, even some people will say, oh, the rural statistics don't count because the data's skewed. I mean, fair enough, but even if you didn't include homicide at all, or even if you rounded it way down, rural areas would still be among the more dangerous ones overall. They'd be close to the most dangerous ones overall. But yeah, other than rural areas, medium metro core, and then major metro core with the 500,000 to 1 million category would both be some of the worst ones, and also small metro in general. So yeah, but I mean, and also even still, major metro core for the really big cities would be safer than the rural areas, even if you just disqualified the murder statistics entirely. Okay, so I want to look a bit more into what cities are that size. So there's only like 10 to 12 cities in the US as of like 2024 or 2020 that are over 1 million. New York, LA, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia, San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas, Jacksonville, Fort Worth, San Jose. And again, these statistics are from a few years beforehand. But yeah, it would be a similar list. Well, it would be 2019 actually, so not different from the 2021 by that much. So it'd be like 10 cities for 2020. Yeah, so not that different. So most of these are like the denser, bigger, more walkables, or at least that include more walkable areas like New York, LA, Chicago, Philadelphia. I guess to an extent you could list San Diego with those, although not as much. But it includes some more sprawling cities that are less dense also, like Houston, Phoenix, San Antonio, Dallas, Jacksonville, Fort Worth, and Austin, San Jose. Also, Austin is really creeping up on the 1 million mark. They're coming quite close. So yeah, if you look down, the 500,000 to 1 million would include a lot more cities. It includes like way more. It includes actually Washington, D.C., Boston, Baltimore. So a few of the like dense walkable cities. It also includes San Francisco. So yeah, DC. So yeah, those ones on average have a higher crime rate than the really big ones. And those include a lot of these like mid-sized cities. A lot of the ones that like aren't considered like the big walkable cities, but like more mid-sized ones, although a few of the big walkable ones too. But whereas the category with the biggest cities, the more like big walkable cities are more highly represented among them. They're like almost half the cities there, whereas among the next category, it's a significantly smaller percentage of the cities are like the big dense walkable ones. So that's something to keep in mind. Like the big dense walkable cities are safer overall than the smaller cities. Now, when looking at this, there's obvious issues with the data. Like, I mean, okay, for one thing, you could say, well, safety doesn't just include the chance of getting killed, it includes the chance of being victimized by crime in other ways, which, yes, I do have the data for those. However, I can't find equivalent data for traffic injuries because, to be fair, you need to look at not only like robberies, assaults, and stuff like that, but if you're going to look at non-fatal things, you'd also have to look at traffic injuries per capita. And I haven't been able to find those stats demarcated by like urban, rural, suburban area. So that's why I've left that out of the equation. But again, that would, yeah, for a more fair overall picture, you need to look at that too. Also, for those wondering, Canada's actually safer than the US overall. Any of these areas like suburban, urban, etc., Canada overall is safer than all of them for traffic deaths and homicides combined. Now I can't find that data for Canada on a region by region basis, like urban versus suburban, but I'm saying Canada overall is safer than any of these community sizes for the United States. And significantly so. So yeah, take that for what it's worth. And the same would be true for probably any EU country overall. Unless, okay, a few random EU countries might have. Actually, no, I take that back. Some of the Eastern European countries would have higher traffic accident death rates, but I think any sizable Western European country would be lower overall, probably, than any of the American regions demarcated by size, or definitely compared to the US overall. So yeah, I guess my conclusions from this is that overall rural areas do seem to be the most dangerous. Medium-sized urban areas are, like central urban areas, are also pretty bad. And smaller cities seem to be fairly bad. Whereas the ones that are less bad seem to be suburbs of big cities or mid-sized cities, and then the inner city of like the really big cities. So those would be the less dangerous ones overall. So take that for what it's worth. Like, again, I'm trying to be objective here. So yes, like suburbs might, depending on the size of the city, like overall, I did find like the safest area overall was the suburbs of large cities. So I guess take that for what it's worth. But again, there's other arguments too. Like for instance, if you are in a dense walkable city, you can choose not to drive and get by somewhat that way, and that would probably make you a lot safer overall. Although again, it might make you more vulnerable to homicide overall, but still overall you might be safer in that situation. And also, these categories don't like. Even the big city category still includes a lot of cities that aren't really good prototypes for dense walkable cities, like say Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth. So if it was only looking at the dense walkable cities, I'd imagine the traffic deaths might be significantly lower. And also homicides, I don't know. I don't know if they would be lower or higher, but traffic deaths, I'd imagine, would be a lot lower if they were only including for like large urban cores, cities like New York, DC, Boston, Chicago, even Los Angeles, as opposed to like cities like Dallas, Houston, whatever, that are just like not very walkable and that would have much higher traffic death rates. So that'd be an issue, is that they don't really distinguish that in large cities, like more walkable ones versus less walkable ones. And even in like the more walkable ones, it would vary a lot based on what part of the city you're in, for both homicide rate and for traffic accident death rate. Because even in some of these more dense walkable cities, there's still significant parts of the city proper that are essentially more suburban than urban. Like definitely in the case of Los Angeles. But even in the case of like Washington, D.C., like there's areas of D.C. that I would say are more suburban than urban. Although they're not the majority, but they still do exist. And probably within city limits of some of the other big dense cities too. But yeah, my point is, overall, yeah, it does seem that the idea that rural areas are safer overall is just massively not true. Like, it's just massively goes against the truth. And do suburbs seem to be safer overall? I mean, from these statistics, yes. Like, when you compare suburbs of their equivalent city for both size categories, like major metro and medium metro, which are the ones where they distinguish suburb from city, yes, in both cases, when you break it down, the suburbs are safer than the city overall. But again, I will caution that, like, a flaw in this is that they don't differentiate between more walkable large cities and less walkable large cities. And I think if you differentiated that further, the statistics might go more in favor of the more walkable cities, which is really what urbanists are promoting. Like, they're not promoting Dallas or Houston as the model. So I guess these statistics do vindicate suburbanites a little bit, but I would caution in because because of what I just said, the lack of distinction between walkable and non-walkable core cities. But also, I do think these statistics don't reflect well on rural areas. Rural areas are terrible for traffic accidents. Firsthand, driving on country roads, 2-lane country roads at night is so fucking dangerous. I'd say it's probably about as dangerous as walking in ghetto neighborhoods at night. It's really fucking bad. The cars, they zoom by. Half the drivers are probably drunk. There's deer all over the roads a lot of the time. Elk, moose, whatever the fuck. There's sometimes people will walk on the side of the road, like often native people in reservations will just walk on the side of the road at night, which is super dangerous. Also, there's the fact that people they'll drive at really quick speeds. As I mentioned, they'll often be inebriated. You can't see well because it's really dark. The roads, they wind often. People will pass on the opposite side of the road when they're allowed, but they'll do it when it's not safe. I've almost been in a head-on collision once that way. It was in Utah near Arches. Some idiot tried to pass in my lane and almost hit me head on. I had to swerve into the shoulder to avoid a head-on collision, and this was at night. What a fucking moron. I'm pretty sure they had an SUV or something similar, a pickup truck or whatever. It was some kind of big vehicle. So yeah, I mean, overall, rural areas don't look great from this. And yeah, I mean, people who spread this constant, like, oh, move to a rural area, it's safer. I mean, they really need to take into account the car accident statistics. Now, as far as suburbs go, yes, suburbs are more dangerous overall than cities. When looking at car accidents specifically, that is true. However, when looking at both homicides and car accidents, it looks like the inner cities are worse. But as I mentioned, I think the fact that this study doesn't differentiate between the denser, more walkable cities for inner cities and then the less dense, less walkable big cities for inner cities like Dallas and Houston, I think that's a bit of an issue. And of course, there's some issues with the data in other categories, but I think that would be potentially a bigger issue in how much it sways the data. But overall, yeah, those are my findings from this.